All right, everyone. Good morning. Let's get started. My name is Ann Klein. I am the Sustainability Manager at the Pet Sustainability Coalition. Very excited to have you all here this morning to join us to talk about innovation. So first things first, want to get started with a little bit of housekeeping. And let's see. So first and foremost, everyone has been put on mute and their videos turned off. We will have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of this presentation. So be sure to be thinking about questions and sending them through the chat box. My colleague, Melissa Bauer, our Director of Sustainability at PSC, will be monitoring the chat box and we'll be helping in the end with Q&A. So be sure to include your questions and answers. Please use the chat box also just to introduce yourself. Feel free to introduce yourself while we're getting going. And the last point I want to make is that we are recording this, and all of the slides and the recording will be sent to the registrants after today's call. So let's get started. Sorry. Let's get started. And first and foremost, I want to focus on a brief moment on PSC and who we are. The Pet Sustainability Coalition is an industry nonprofit group in the pet industry focused on helping our members improve their sustainability practices. We are a global institution that works with retailers, distributors, brands, manufacturers, all working to improve their environmental and social practices. We are a global institution in the sense that about 65% of our member companies are in the US and 35% are outside of the US, mainly in Europe, Asia, and Australia. We are also growing rapidly. Since the beginning of this year, we've grown by 35%, which I think is indicative of this industry really understanding the value that sustainability brings to businesses. So in addition to supporting our members, we work very closely with three major industry initiatives to address large-scale problems that are far too big for a single company to address. We're very proud of the work we're doing right now, focused on three major areas. One is sustainable packaging, one is sustainable protein sourcing, and the final one is diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can learn more about what we're doing in these areas by visiting our website, petsustainability.org. And they're quite exciting. So we're really happy about the work we're doing and hope that you'll get involved. So let's get started on three things your business needs for innovation and sustainability. And I think the big question is, why are we focusing on innovation in a sustainability webinar? And it's because sustainability, by its definition, forces companies to think of their current business practices and consider how to improve them by using less resources. And these constraints are, by their own definition, they can foster creativity and innovation. The other reason that I think it's so important to focus on innovation and sustainability together is that the most innovative companies tend to be sustainable. Sustainability can drive innovation and drive becoming top in class and innovators in a particular space. We, as many of you know, we have a strong relationship with B Corp certified companies, and those companies are very focused on environmental and social responsibility, and because of that, they're incredibly innovative. So I love this this recent quote from Harvard Business Review that sustainability is a mother lode of innovation. Sustainability is an opportunity for innovative practices to really take hold. And I think many people will say, but isn't it hard? And how do I do this with competing demands for our time? And our speaker today would say, no, it's not. It doesn't have to be hard. And there are plenty of reasons to focus your time on it. So today I want to welcome Tim Schuster. Tim is the founder and CEO of Popup Think Tank, which is a business consulting firm that focuses on innovation and business support. Tim has made a career of helping founders and nonprofit businesses, founders, nonprofits exercise their innovative muscles. Prior to founding Popup Think Tank, Tim served as a strategic development consultant for Thrivent Financial, which is a Fortune 500 firm. And he also led new business development at Bright Peak Financial. Tim has degrees from the University of Minnesota and Bethel University. He was also the founder and pastor at Midtown Church and lives in Minnesota with his wife and 2 kids. Popup Think Tank is a really innovative approach to looking at business development through the eyes of innovation. Tim leads workshops, business model innovation, human development workshops, multi-day and design sprints, focus groups, and they also do a lot of work on inline and digital course creation. So with that, I'm going to share the screen or stop and share the screen with Tim. Tim, are you there?
I am on. Thanks so much, Anne. What a nice introduction. I'm grateful for that.
Awesome.
And I'm assuming that my screen is coming up and that my slides will be here. All right. We've had some trouble getting my video on, and so I won't be able to show the fancy conference room that I'm sitting in, but we have slides to guide us through our time together. And what I have for you are 3 steps to innovation through a lens of sustainability. And just right off the bat, what I would like to do is just, I would like to just make a bold statement right away. What I would say is that as a team, as an enterprise, as somebody who's on this webinar, you are likely doing something to deliver value, some sort of product to a stakeholder or a customer, whether that's internal or external. And in return, you get to capture value. And this is the basic starting point of any enterprise. But what we're seeing in our world today is that to do so without regard to environmental and social impact, it's not innovation. That is not innovation, that's actually exploitation. And so if I could just be so bold right away as to say right away that what I see happening and what many are predicting that is coming down the pipe and in the years to come is that when we say sustainable innovation, that would actually be redundant. That all innovation would be done through a lens of sustainable innovation. And that to say sustainable innovation would actually be a redundant statement. And what I mean by this is that sustainability is not something that we add on to a product or a service later on. It's not something that is an afterthought or some sort of aftermarket product that we put on. That's not the idea here. It's actually something we start with from the beginning, and it's never too late. And so my bold prediction, just to show on the first slide, is that what's coming and what's emerging is that all innovation in our world would be done through a lens of sustainability. Now, when we say innovation, most of the time we're thinking about products and services. We're thinking about fun gadgets and technology and some of the cool things that we're seeing on the shelves and available to purchase. And of course, that is one lens through which to look at innovation, but we can innovate a lot of different things. We can innovate brand and design. We can innovate systems and processes, supply and value chains. Entire business models can be innovated. We can innovate workplace engagement, and in many cases, that is a great place to start in thinking about innovation. We'll talk a little bit about the who is doing the innovating. But today, underneath all of these innovations that we can see, it starts with a mental model for innovation. And that's our focus today, is to thinking about innovation and thinking about through a lens of how do we innovate in our crazy changing world. And as Anne mentioned in her intro, it's hard work. And one of the reasons that innovation is hard work is because it's not just as easy as asking people what they want. Henry Ford is known to say that if I would have asked what people wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And this quote captures so much. Maybe you've been in the experience where you've sent out a survey and you asked, you've asked a group of people, do you want the event to be in October or November? And most of the people say November, and you have the event in November, and then not as many people showed up as you want. And you're like, well, we asked them what they wanted, and then they don't end up doing what we said. Or maybe you said, do you want the bike frame in red or blue? And most of the people said blue. And you build it in blue and you don't quite get the expectations that you want. And surveys can be really misleading. And this is what makes innovation so maddeningly frustrating is that people don't think what they feel, that there's this gulf between the thinking and the ways that we think and feel. And then we don't say what we think, and then we don't do what we say. And so it's not just as easy, I wish it could be just as easy as asking people what they want and then fulfilling orders and giving them exactly what they say they want. And this can feel really frustrating. And so what I have for you today are 3 things to know, 3 steps for innovating when innovation's hard and we can't ask people what they want. And so the very first one is that we're just invited to start with constraints. Start with constraints. You start right where you're at. This includes starting with a context that you're in, you starting with a need, starting with limited resources. And I love that quote at the front that Anne said, that creativity loves constraints. A quick illustration of those constraints. If you take one group and you give them 30 seconds and you ask them to brainstorm and list things that are the color white, they will come up with a list of the things that are color white. If you take a second group and you give them the same amount of time and the same task, but with one difference, and you say brainstorm and list the things that are the color white in your refrigerator at home, the second group almost always will come up with more ideas than the first group. And this is because creativity loves a constraint. Our minds love a context. We actually thrive on limitations. When we can have a box to think in, I know the idea is to think outside the box, but the box can actually be really helpful. And of course, one of our boxes as we innovate through a lens of sustainability is that it needs to make a difference in the world from the beginning. That is just one of our starting presuppositions to the whole thing. It also provides focus. I think the other thing I would say on this point too about starting with constraints is that innovation rarely originates from a place of comfort or safety or predictability. I know this isn't what we want to hear, that we would be great if we could do so and have it be safe and predictable and comfortable, but it's just not how it works. There's a reason why entrepreneurs and pioneers and inventors through the years have innovated with us and for us, and they've taken the risks on our ends and on our behalf. And if institutional bureaucratic funding is what we're looking for sources of innovation, that funding actually ends up being more of a reward for innovation than an actual cause of innovation. And top down and predictable planning processes and experts, there's just limitations to what we can expect for innovation. And so it's driven by necessity. I always look for a necessity. I look for a pain, look for where the backs are up against the wall, because if that's you and that's what you're feeling right now, you're in the place to innovate. That's where innovation comes from. It's also about thinking bottom up. I have friends who work in retail, and they know right away that when they get a box from corporate to put the product on the shelf, they know right away, because they're on the front lines, they know right away what's going to sell out first and what they're going to have left over. They have an intuitive sense from interacting with their customers. And this is such an advantage for those of us who maybe don't work on the front lines. We're playing behind the scenes and we're doing innovation and planning. We have amazing insights available to us by the folks that are working on the front lines with customers, whether that's in retail or in customer service, the people who are having an intuitive sense day in and day out. It's also an invitation to observe the fringes and the margins and the outliers, the things that haven't quite caught on yet, but are showing a lot of promise. And that's just getting curious and asking what wants to happen. What are we seeing among our stakeholders, our customers? And what behaviors are they demonstrating that maybe wants to be scaled and maybe wants to be brought out into made more popular? What wants to happen? What energy are we seeing? And so this is the first point, that innovation is driven by necessity. If that you feel like your back is up against the wall And in 2020, many of us feel like our backs are up against the wall, that we're running out of options. There are big things like social and environmental constraints and unpredictable economic realities, political uncertainties, of course. This is our landscape and our conditions in 2020. The good news is that this is ripe for innovation. And if this is how it feels for you in your context, you are in the place to start innovating. You're in the right place. That's the first point. The second point that I would say is that innovation is actually not up to us. In some ways, innovation is not a helpful word. If I say, go be innovative, then I just go and do something new. And that's actually not a helpful command. It's not a helpful charge. It's not a helpful invitation. Innovation isn't up to us. It's decided later by the end user over time, whether or not they buy it or whether or not it actually adds value. And so innovation is about creating and delivering value. And I think value is actually maybe a better word than innovation. Now, here's what's tough about this. And this is what I'd love to spend some more time on with you this morning, is that what's valuable is not always logical. It's not always logical. Value tends to transcend our categories of what we think is logical. And I can give you an example. Imagine that it's the mid-90s. And you and your team have been commissioned to innovate a viable competitor to Coca-Cola, right? You have to pitch a competitor to Coca-Cola. And here's what you propose. You propose a drink that's in an undersized container. You propose that it's priced just a little bit too high and that test consumers say it actually doesn't taste that good. Now, if you pitched this in the mid-90s, you would have been laughed out of whatever room that you are in. And yet, when you look at what emerged as a primary competitor to Coca-Cola, we actually see that that's exactly what happened. It absolutely defies logic and what we think of as logic and what people are going to find valuable and actually demonstrate with their wallet and with their purchasing choices. And we see this all over in history. I mean, just think of the pitches that never happened, right? And the best part of it all is that people will write the entire thing for free. That was Wikipedia. And just watch as perfectly sane people pay $5 for a drink that they can make at home for a fraction of that. Well, that ended up being Starbucks. And so I confidently predict that the great enduring fashion of the next century will be a really coarse, uncomfortable fabric, which fades unpleasantly and takes ages to dry. And to date, it's largely been popular with indigent laborers. And that's what we get with jeans. And what people really want is a cool vacuum cleaner, Dyson, and people will be forced to choose between 3 or 4 items. That was McDonald's. And all of these are an example of, things that at the time, if they were pitched in a room as an idea of something to go and build, would have been said, wait, that's not logical. That actually doesn't make any sense. And so I find this T-square really helpful because on one end, we have the things that we would consider illogical, but actually kind of end up making, like, they make sense looking in hindsight. And they're successful. And by successful in this context, I simply mean it worked. For whatever reason, it added value to whoever the end consumer was. And I think this can be a really helpful framework as we think about adding value to people's lives, internal to our teams or external to a customer. What do we do when it doesn't always feel illogical and ideas come up that don't feel like they might be that logical but need to be tested anyway? And then the stuff that, if we try something that isn't illogical, it doesn't work, well, we just blame it. Like, we knew that wasn't going to work because it was illogical. Or, when there's something that doesn't work and it was logical all along, we tend to say things like, well, we didn't get lucky. It should have worked, but it didn't, such is life. And then, of course, when over time, when logic prevails, that's the land of promotions and bonuses. Many careers are made and corporate ladders are climbed by just always being logical and always making logical decisions. Because as long as you're always logical, you're never going to get fired. And some things work and some things don't. And that is where the center of gravity almost on innovation always wants to take you and your team as to what's logical. And when something is illogical, it tends to look logical in hindsight, and it's represented as if it was logical all along. And I think this makes sense if we start to think about it in terms of all the different ways that we can add value. We need tools that can help us, open up our minds as to what can add value to people's lives. And this is where the elements of value pyramid comes in handy. And this is research that Bain & Company did, and it's reported in the Harvard Business Review. And they have 4 main categories. And you notice right away it's in a pyramid, which looks like Maslow's hierarchy. And it looks like that for a reason. At the very bottom level, we've got some functional categories. Those functional categories are things that you can measure. They're very observable. Everything from it does a task, it does a job, it reduces risk, et cetera. But there's also emotional ways that value can be added. There's life-changing ways, and social impact is at the very top. And what I really love about what this research does is it really expands our horizons for not just the value that can be offered, but the problems that can be solved. And what's really important is that a company must provide, and this is what the article says, at least some of the functional elements required by a particular product category. And so if we think about all of the different ways that we can mix and match products and services, internal, external, that can add value to an end user's life, this really opens up our minds as to what's possible. And most products really only do 3 or 4. There is no product in the world that can deliver on all 30 different ways. Now, we're talking a lot about the what of innovation, but I think there's also something to be said about the who. And I really like this story from New York Times Magazine. And they covered what Google learned from its quest to build the perfect team. Innovation is a team sport, by the way. And what they said is that it's a sense of confidence that the team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. And they describe a team that, that's characterized by interpersonal trust and mutual respect, in which people are comfortable being themselves. And you think about that T-square of logic versus illogical. If we're going to be in a space where we can test and iterate and propose ideas that don't always feel logical on the surface, we need to have team environments that are conducive to such conversations. And of course, then it's just like, this is part of what it means to do sustainable innovation, is that creating welcoming and inclusive workplace cultures is absolutely vital for sustainable innovation. In fact, in a lot of ways, it is in itself a form of sustainable innovation. That everything you do to create a culture at your workplace of welcoming and inclusivity is in itself something that can be considered a sustainable innovation. So for those of you who are working hard on your DEI initiatives and other initiatives that create workplace cultures, kudos to you for entering in on that sustainable, innovative side of that. So that's the second point. That innovation is not up to us. It's actually more about what's creating and delivering value, whether it's logical or illogical, all of the different ways that can happen. It's not just functional, it's also emotional and social. And then what we're doing to create team cultures. And so that's the second point. Now I want to get super practical. I want to give you something that you can do today. If you're looking for something that gets you going on the innovation today, the rest of the day. It's morning where I'm at. I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now I'm still morning, and you have maybe, if you're still in the morning, maybe there's an afternoon ahead of you. So what can you do today? Well, you can embrace a tinker and test mentality. A tinker and test mentality, a way of looking at your world and your work as simply proposing and designing tests. And this helps us with this conundrum between illogical and logical. The only way that we will know whether something is going to add value is to actually make it and then offer it and measure whether or not it works. And this is why these companies have been able to do this, is they've been able to do it through the lens of, well, we're just getting out there and we're iterating and we're testing. And I love this part of the story from HBR. This is in the most recent September-October issue of HBR. And they talk about the social impact efforts that are creating value. And one of this quote is just, it's worth reading. It's when senior leaders at Vaseline interviewed medical professionals at the CDC and Doctors Without Borders and the UN Refugee Agency, they learned that Vaseline jelly was an indispensable part of emergency first aid kits, particularly in developing countries. So preventable skin conditions such as deeply cracked hands and burns from cooking on gas stoves or using kerosene lamps. They were keeping people from working, going to school, engaging in other basic activities. And that insight led to a new social impact strategy to help heal the skin of 5 million people living in crisis or conflict. And the strategy connected business goals with societal needs and differentiated the brand from competitors while increasing revenue. Now, there's one thing about this quote that I really want to zero in on. It's easy to miss. How did they get there? They did it through interviews. And this has been my experience over the years, that interviews are an indispensable tool that is available to us at any time to get those key insights that can lead to those sustainable innovations over time. And so I put together this little chart that helps us think about and gives us a mental model for how to enter into an interviewing and testing and hypothesis making environment. And the very first thing we have to decide is that very first constraint: who's it for? Who's it going to benefit? And do we know them, and what do we know about them, and how would we describe them? That's the first constraint. The first focus is we have to know the thing that we're making, who it's for. And then we need to ask the question, what would add value? I mean, of course, if we ask them what would add value straight up, they're probably going to give us an answer, but we can almost be sure that whatever they say is maybe just like a first guess. But what we can do is listen for that music underneath the lyrics. What we can do is start to ask the question, okay, they're saying this, but I really think that it might actually be this. Or they're saying this, but what if it actually means this? Or some of those trends across those interviews that we're hearing is that it sounds like there's a value gap here. And this is really important. So that hypothesis, we make a hypothesis, who it's for, and then we seek to learn whether or not it's true. And then it comes to testing that hypothesis, where we create a prototype. And prototype can be a really intimidating term. Prototype actually doesn't have to be intimidating. It can be something super simple. It could be a brochure for a product that doesn't yet exist. It could be a landing page. It could be a pitch deck. It could be anything that you can put in front of that end user or that stakeholder and to say, hey, here's what we're thinking about building. What do you make of this? And then we get that feedback. And that process of actually making a prototyping and putting it in front of a stakeholder or a customer and getting that feedback is invaluable. And this also changes the way that we do interviews and getting feedback. I love the method from the Stanford's D School. They use an I like, I wish, what if. And I like is, hey, what do you like about what you're seeing here? But instead of asking, what don't you like, they just invite you to say, what do you find yourself wishing? And that wishing language makes it way more practical. People will give you really great ideas about what they find themselves wishing about the solution that you're proposing. And when you start getting an end user or a stakeholder in that realm of, I wish it did this, I wish it did that, or what if it did this, or what if it did that, you're getting some really rich insights. And again, you can do this anytime. 3 questions, put a prototype in front of them. What do you like about this? What do you wish was different? What do you wish about it? What do you find yourself wishing? And then dream with us. What if? You can do this with end users and customers. You can do this with internal teams that your internal team is serving. People love to be interviewed. They will give you their time. They will give you feedback. And it's often a number 1 step to innovating and innovating really well. And the other thing that I would invite you to is to listen to what's not being said in those interviews. As you're getting curious about customers and end users and stakeholders, and you're interviewing them, there's going to be things that won't be said. What are you noticing that's not being said? And you'll see there's a FedEx logo here. Probably recognize this, one of the most widely recognized logos in the world. And what many people don't see is that what's not there creates a reality. And many people don't see the arrow that is part of that logo. It's a little bit subliminal. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And some people would say that arrow is actually not there. That's an E and an X. I don't see an arrow. Of course you see the arrow. The arrow is created by what's called negative space in design. And negative space is when we look at what's not there, and what's not there creates a reality in and of itself. And so interviewing customers and listening for the actual needs and actual problems to be solved is as much about listening to what's being said as well as listening to what's not being said. And I love this metaphor of look for the arrows in the conversation. And the one last point before I wrap us up and we do some Q&A is that interviewing just shows us how to love their problem more than their solution, or more than our solution. That when we start to be way more curious about the problems, dilemmas, challenges that are faced by the people that we're serving, by our customers, by our internal stakeholders, and we start to be way more focused on that problem, the solutions will come. It's easy to come up with a solution. Loving their problem is the hard work, and that empathy of going to work is part of what we're invited to do in innovation. Again, these interviewing and testing is something that you can do with your team starting as soon as today. And so that's what I have for you. And 3 steps to interviewing, just to recap, is start with constraints, start with your focus, start with who. Embrace those constraints because they will lead to creativity. We have to have a box to think within, and you can be creative in whatever box you find yourself in. You have to have a box to think outside the box. So start with the box and then think outside the box. And then value, it's not up to us. Innovation is not up to us, and it's often illogical. So we need to create safe places and safe teams where illogical ideas can be tested and iterated, and that ideas can have their fair shots. And then we take it to market, we take it to customer, we take it to the stakeholder by embracing this, embracing that tinker and test mentality that actually has us showing stuff to an end user and getting their feedback on some of the things that we're thinking about creating. this is just the first part of what we can do together. I invite you, if you're at all interested, I've made myself available for 45-minute strategy sessions. You can hop over to a webpage at popupthinktank.com/PSE. And on that page, you can grab time on my calendar and we can talk about whatever innovation challenge that you're facing. We'll toss around ideas. We'll talk about how we could test it. We can enact some of this work. You can grab the webinar slides there as well, including the sources and links. So you can grab this list right here of where we got a lot of this material. Some of it's timeless and some of it was just published last month. So hop over to popupthinktank.com/PSC and we can continue the conversation. And in the meantime, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll see if there's any questions that came in. Anne, have any questions come in for us today?